Hello and welcome to another episode of the Are Change talk show. I thank you for joining me. Now, ancient history, free energy devices, Tartaria, and other mysteries have always fascinated me. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show Kelly Jones, who will be discussing these subjects further. Let's cross over to that interview now. Kelly, thank you very much for joining me. Now, a lot of history has been fabricated and deliberately covered up and not mentioned in the history books. It's a very calculated effort to try and suppress this information. When did your fascinating research begin?
Gosh, you know what? Look, I've been on I started on the spiritual path when I was like 18 and then onto the disclosure path when I was like about 25. And then obviously we went through the hecticness of last year. And in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, the word Tartaria kept popping up on my radar, but I didn't have anything to connect it to. It just was this random concept that was sort of floating way back over there behind the disclosure scenes. And but like I've recently, unfortunately and fortunately relocated to Melbourne City right in the middle of this like bullshit that we're in. And and then Tartaria exploded in front of my face because like literally Melbourne is so hardcore on the Tartarian evidence that I just was so excited, Jeff, to jump into it because like it's the very first time in all of our work with disclosure that there is a tangible, physical, see it with your own eyes, touch it, taste it, smell it, poke it, like non-lofty evidence that we are living in a full-on cover-up, nefarious lie. And like it's the first time we're not dealing with something lofty, you know? Like you can go out I can go out my front door, go to the exhibition centre here in Carlton in Melbourne, and there's this amazing building that's just right in front of my eyes. And I can actually look at it now through the Tartarian lens and go, holy shit, there's no way we could have built that before we had light bulbs 200 years ago, no power tools, no factories, no infrastructure, no people. What the fuck is this? So I would say like I've got very passionate about it since moving to Melbourne.
That's excellent. And as you said, seeing is believing, and some of the architecture on these historical buildings, it really is amazing. And people are led to believe that we only had primitive tools, horse and carts, and that's very much inconsistent when you see this, isn't it?
Oh, so inconsistent. And like when people get told the story of sort of like a city being built, well, let's just focus on Melbourne. Like when people get told the history of Melbourne, roughly, it got founded around 1835, by a few men, most of them farmers with a few flocks of sheep. There was Indigenous camping on the riverbanks. There was nothing here. And then literally within 10 years, and like bear in mind that the only access we're told to Australia at that point are these tall ships, which really we're only talking at max like 7 or 8 coming every year. And when you look at the scale of these tall ships, they're like pretty small actually. And when they tell you that basically hundreds of people came through, thousands of convicts, 200 cows, 500 chickens, 1,500 ducks, oxen, bull, pigs, all on the same ship, like food for a 6-month trip, and then all the materials and infrastructure they needed to build these things. And then 10 years, boom, Melbourne was built. And like none of that makes sense when you start looking at the evidence. And like basically, like when you look at how a city's built, it's not an organic structure. Like it doesn't just pop up because they like to parallel the foundation of Melbourne with, say, like a little farm building, organically on the side here. But no. Melbourne is totally underground. Like not only is it totally underground, it involves massive sewer systems, massive plumbing systems. Like you don't just whip up a city, especially on the grid that Melbourne's on, without having to dig deep down, put in your power, your plumbing, all this other stuff. Then you build the buildings on top of that. And we're led to believe that Melbourne got built, and not just shitty corrugated wooden structures, but epic, amazing structures that even today we couldn't get anywhere near. Like you can parallel the Collingwood Town Hall, gorgeous, up alongside the Gubby Flats behind it. And like that really symbolizes the difference in our skill set. When we first arrived as convicts, we are told, even though, Jeff, we were never dealing with convicts. Like these were soldiers that were sent to fight a war with our Indigenous. That's what was really going on there. And you look at these buildings and wow, like we can't replicate them today, but we're led to believe, like seriously in our history books, that we built these before the first power tool. Before the first fucking power tool or even light bulb in Melbourne. Like fucking, we did not build these buildings. Melbourne was found dead. It wasn't founded. We found this city dead and empty.
Very well said. And yes, the structural design, it's very stunning. And if you look at the buildings that are being assembled and put together today, there's just no comparison. And what's being told in the history books, it's just not practical to be able to design such magnificent pieces of art. It really is incredible. Now, they've even spoken about free energy devices being attached to some of these buildings as well, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Like all of the, and then like the consistent designs, consistent gridded designs around the whole world. Like Tartaria is just a generic term. It's not like meant to describe, because we don't know all of what's got, we're only just digging the surface here, but let's use Tartaria as a generic umbrella term for this sort of conscious movement that's going on. And I can tell you that like, I coin it the Tartarian transformational consciousness, because once you get into the Tartaria stuff, man, every single program is busted. Like you cannot believe in one single thing after you understand what Tartaria is about, because you are totally going to get and see for your own eyes that history is a lie. And everything they've ever told you or educated you is a lie. And I mean, and like the extent of it, Jeff, like you go into the History Society and they've made up all these names and families and bullshit, and they've got all these dates, and then you go into Wikipedia and it's just replicating all these random names and architects and bullshit. And it's just like, wow, we're indoctrinated so deeply in a mess here. There's nothing that's real. There's nothing that is real in our understanding of this reality. And of course, with Tartaria, you got to start, like our premise starts with the earth is flat. And that too is a lie. And that we're living in a flattened out realm with realms past realms. And, you know, everything we've ever been taught about history, science, geography, architecture, buildings, design, all of these, like, you know, the Greek, all of these sections of history, the Greeks, the neo-Gothic designers, all these like terminologies we've put down don't even exist. Like they've literally added 1,000 years to our timeline that doesn't exist.
I believe that's the case too. And they go to enormous lengths to try and manipulate dates and times. They've even gone and changed the date of when some buildings were established to try and make out that they're newer than what they actually are. Very much manipulation involved, isn't there?
Oh, they quite often just add that number one on the middle. There will be 896 and they'll add a one. They've literally added 1,000 years of fake history to our timeline, and they've put it in this sort of linear fashion where we are taught to believe that the ones here now are the evolved species, and everything that's come behind us have been less evolved and less evolved and less evolved. But the reality is that around 300 years ago, there was a great reset. Mm-hmm. And in that great reset, like our history got scrubbed, we got wiped, everyone disappeared. All these photographic evidence that someone was around of these massive empty cities buried in mud. And then the next lot of evidence comes out where we start to see people introduced all around the world at the same time to these cityscapes, huge cityscapes. Like, we're not talking about the scale. I mean, let's talk about the scale. Like, we come to Melbourne, apparently. We found Melbourne in around 1835, apparently. Just a handful of people. And in 10 years, we choose to build buildings like the National Library behind me. Right, this is This is the very first Tartarian artwork here on a Melbourne building, because we like to explore the idea of how big they are. So the concept is that like we came here and instead of dealing with, you know, shelter, food, farming, like basic amenities, like instead, no. We decided to put all our energy into building massive fuck off buildings like this, like the exhibition center, like the GPO building or the town hall, like that make no sense. Why would we put our energy into it? They're massive, Jeff. The doors are built for fucking giants. The columns, the scales, the windows, they're gigantic. When you look at us, like you go up Collins Street, up to sort of like 333 Collins Street, and we're like these minuscule little entities comparative to these massive doorways, columns, buildings, rooftops. We didn't have scaffolding. We didn't have power. We didn't have factories. We didn't have glass works. We didn't have lead works. We didn't have cement works. We didn't have quarries. We didn't have any of this stuff. And yet we're told we built these. And the other characteristic about the Tartaria hunt, like it's so much fun. Like, guys, if you're like in Melbourne or any city, go fucking outside after this and go and check it out for yourselves, because there's some telltale signs. One, the doors are giants. Giant doors. Number two, elegant, beautiful, geometrical facades, beautiful facades, lots of columns, lots of decorative material, lots of domes on top. And then you've got these mud flooded windows, which is fascinating. These are like all the way through Melbourne. You've got evidence of these streets that are like this. And a normal builder would then level the ground with level flat foundations and build. But we find that these buildings are like the little windows start to be dug into the side of the hill that make no fucking sense. Like these tiny little why are they there? It's just like evidence that at some point everything was covered in mud and this is where they dug it out, which leads us to, well, if that's where they dug it out from, and that's why everything's so angled and the designs are so bizarre in city centres, then how big are they really? Like, are we talking about these just being the rooftops, the tops of these grand structures? Like, we know that we came from a civilization of giants. Pre the last reset, we were intermixed with giants. Like, there's so much evidence of giant skeletons everywhere. Giant buildings, giant doorways, giant musical instrument, giant books, giant everything. Like, you go and type it in, there's giant everything. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating hunt down.
It certainly is. And they've found giant human skeletons, and as you said, some of the architecture, it appears to be built by a highly sophisticated civilization using advanced technologies. And mud floods, sunken cities, that's being spoken about now, isn't it? And it's like they've just excavated these buildings out.
Yep. And like, if you look at early pictures of the city you're in, like go onto Google and find the earliest pictures, what you will find is some really startling characteristics. One is these things that we've termed vanilla skies. So all these photographs of black and white photographs from the sort of like late 1800s, early 1900s, all the skies are whited out. Like, you can't see anything in those skies. It's like they've utilized Photoshop. We know they had advanced technology. Don't think that Photoshop's just been invented for us. Fuck no. Like, that's another illusion of this linear timeline that we're on. Like, it doesn't exist. Photoshop, if it's here now, it's been here always. And they've been manipulating it now as they have always. So all these pictures have just white skies. So it's like they've erased all the buildings, the hugeness of the structures, and the flying machines, because Tartaria had an abundance of Airbuses and flying machines and Zeppelins. And that's why we've got places like the exhibition centre here in Melbourne where literally a Zeppelin could get in there and dock. And then you've got these like images, particularly here in Melbourne, of these building structures, like the city starting to get built, and it's just like massive, huge mud streets, like massive streets, roads that are just mud, covered in mud. And then you see people who are meant to be building these buildings are actually mainly digging out these buildings. Like, you'll find heaps of photos of people digging, and just like sides of dirt, you know, just everywhere. And you start to see these like images of whole buildings, it's like one whole half's in the mud still. So when we get hills in our cities, because hills aren't natural, when we get them in our cities, be pretty much guarantee that there is way more building under there to explore. And to add to that whole concept, like with the Tartarian idea that we live on a flat realm with a firmament around us, we have to add to the concept that there are no mountains like on this flat realm, that either a mountain is either a cut down giant tree, a plateau of a giant tree, or a splintered tree, massive, like 100 kilometers in the air, like tree of life sort of tree, giants for giant trees, or they're melted buildings. So we have like heaps of evidence of like there being technology available before the last reset that actually melted these buildings, like would turn these and would able to turn organic structures into stone. So we start to see all these like amazing structures around the world that like look exactly like animals, exactly like elephants, crocodiles, horses, you know, camels, turtles, giant creatures, dragons even, that have been turned to stone. And then to trip you out even more, like there's heaps of evidence that a lot of our rock outcrop sort of formations are actually giant human beings that have also been turned to stone and fallen. And there's all these images of sort of like mountains that if you turn them up, so it looks identical to a face, a profile of face. Like nothing we have been told about this realm and what we live in and on and who we are and where we're from is true.
I believe that's the case too. And when you look at the grand scale of this lie, the government's telling people tend to start to believe the opposite, that it is flat. And that's right. A lot of the stone and a lot of the rocks, it has been like it's been turned into a serpent. And it's been frozen in time due to some form of cataclysm. And if you look at the hieroglyphics and some of the cave art, there's even pictures of planes, people in like spaceships as well. And, you know, they carved that in, they drew it because they seen it, didn't they?
Yep, absolutely. And like, let's just talk about the hieroglyphics for a second, because that's a fascinating story. So, you know, one awesome thing about following the Tartaria consciousness through is if you're focusing on Australia, which is a unique premise, because literally we were only meant to be here 200 years ago. And then before us, there was nothing, only our original people. So like, then we have to ask the question, like, why aren't these empty cities in the stories of our original people? Why haven't they documented these empty cities? Surely we know for sure they were here and must have been aware of these huge Tartarian structures in these capital cities and around Australia that already existed, but there's no evidence within their Dreamtime stories or their you know, cave art or anything like this. So we've started to like piece this story together, and it's been a really fascinating unraveling. So we've spoken to the evidence Stephen Strong now, and we've spoken to a few of our Indigenous elders, and all of them acknowledge giants, hands down. They've told us some fascinating stories. One is that there was a prophecy with the Indigenous that there'd be a white man coming to Australia and it would rain down terror on our original people. The original people here in Australia, this is why Australia is so significant, are actually the original law keepers of the whole realm. Like entities traveled to Australia throughout our history, unknown to us, in great respect and reverence to seek wisdom and guidance from our original law keepers. And there was a prophecy that came that this white man would come and he would try to destroy the law. Now when Captain Cook arrived in Australia, he didn't arrive here looking for new land. He came here to scope out the enemy, because this nefarious takeover, the ones that have reset our history and now like introduced COVID and doing everything we're seeing in the world, like the only way I think they could get their black magic to hold and hijack our virtual reality was to actually destroy the original law. Like, they actually had to take that action. So they sent Captain Cook over on like a scouting mission. And then he has been reported to document, to say that there were fantastic cities here and portals, and that the Indigenous, our original people, had magic powers. And that he sent back for the fleet of soldiers, not convicts, the fleet to come over to Australia and do war against our original people. And they were friggin' losing, because our original people still had magic. They were the law holders. They weren't like, enslaved yet by this nefarious agenda. So he continued to tell us a story that when the soldiers started to understand that they were fighting people who had magic and could sing their way to winning this war, basically. The song lines are really important. The sound convergence really important. Even way through Tartaria, sound convergence and harmonics, the cathedrals we were about to mention, the ether, all very important. So it was reported that soldiers were attempting to escape from this war because they knew it was impossible, and they like didn't want to fight this war. They didn't want to kill these people. They had reverence. And so they heard rumors because of our original people that in the middle of Australia there was a white man's city, that Australia, they kept saying it, go to the center of Australia where your white fellas are. You're already there. Go to the center of Australia. So all these soldiers kept trying to escape over Flinders Ranges and over the ranges, and to get to this like city that they were told was there by the original people. And so that's our first acknowledgement, that there was some acknowledgement there that we actually came to Australia and there were fabulous cities here. And now we don't even know if they're 3D, 4D, 5D. We don't know if they're like physical bricks and mortar or crystalline 5D frequency. We don't know. But these were the stories that we've managed to uncover. And from that process with our original lawkeepers, they were already pre-warned that Cook was coming, and they moved the law. So the original law, which would then denote that this original law was maybe more than just a set of scripture, but actually was a physical entity in some, because they literally said they moved the law from the east coast of Australia, the Byron Bay region of Australia, which is where we've been told civilization started, where all the tribes started, over to the center of Australia, somewhere in the center of Australia, not Uluru, but somewhere in the center of Australia. So it's been very fascinating to start to piece together our true Indigenous history alongside Tartarian history, because, Jeff, for us all moving forward now, the great unvaxxed, like literally we are going to be made refugees. And like the only way forward for us now is we have to stand on our own 2 feet and start these intentional communities. We're going to start new forest schools, like the Steiner School's fallen. Like we have to start all these new things in alignment with our principles and values. And the only way we can do it is understanding original sovereign law. And so our original people's story and all the genocide committed against them and all the lies and treason and brutality, that's now our story. Yep. And together, we are going to have to come together, and we are going to have to learn the right law. So Tartaria takes us Australians back to that understanding. And that's like an amazing gift. This unraveling has led me and the people I'm playing around with, too.
That's a brilliant description, and you really put it in terms that the viewers can understand. Very well done. And a lot of the tribes and the Indigenous folks, they're true custodians of the land. Absolutely. They look after it. They replenish what's there. And when you see what was done, the coal seam fracking, the gas hubs that are putting in, they're completely destroying and taking all the resources. So, yeah, it's very, very evil what's taking place. Now, when you look at some of the giant tree stumps, there was one Devil's Tower, and it looks like it's been cut completely down. And the trees, it looks like they used to grow into the heavens, right into the sky. And some of the General Shermans as well. There's old black and white photographs where they're standing next to them, and they went to enormous efforts to cut all these down, didn't they?
Absolutely. Like, and you've got to look. So with new eyes, viewers, like there's an amazing documentary that came out, I don't know, maybe like 2017. And it came from like Russia, somewhere like this. And it was just a fantastic documentary comparing tree stumps to our mountains and quarries to our seas and volcanoes to like mulch pits, basically, like combustive material over time warming up and exploding. So basically, like if you look at our mountains today, they only really take a few forms. One is they're totally flat, like it's like a cut off stump of a tree. The other one is that they're shattered, like the Himalayas, where they're very rigid, like a tree's fallen down and shattered its trunk. You know, so like that sort of like sums up our mountain range, and anything in between that is generally speaking going to be a melted city or citadel. Like we've been through an apocalypse before. Like Tartaria shows us, like if you go through the sort of encyclopaedias, like, you know, those dusty books you find in antiquity bookshops that have like, you know, crazy illustrations in them. Like, and these, if you start to look at those illustrations, they tell you so much. They're fucked up, basically. Like, they're really bad. Like, I mean, there's some, we've created monsters before. We've genetically modified the fuck out of everything, every living form, human form, animal form. Like, we've been monstrous, and there's been terrible gods and like huge apocalyptic events in the past. We have no understanding of our past at all. Like, we do not, if you guys knew the extent of the craziness of our past timelines, so many people just lose their freaking minds. Like, it's insane stuff. So you got to have an open mind here. But anyway, going back through those history books, you can see these illustrated artworks that we have absolutely been in apocalypse before. And you'll see buildings that are just like mountains that were cities that have been destroyed, and like these like little windows just sticking out of the hills, or like little doorways, or, you know, you guys have seen the pictures of these random little tiny houses that are sort of built into a mountainside, like, you know, 2 kilometers up in the air. Like, they're all melted buildings. So that's the form of our mountains. So yeah, you can see it now. When you look at a plateau that's been cut off, you've got to ask, like, how big were those people that they had machinery that could cut a tree down that size? Like, a mountain doesn't naturally form like this. We've got we've got examples here in Australia of these mountainous, like, flat plateaus. But I tell you, Jeff, like, Australia's fucking fascinating. Like, we've been told we just live around a massive, empty desert plain. But the thing is about Australia is that whole desert plain is red sand. And the thing about Tartaria is that all the buildings are built out of red brick, and all the civilizations are built out of red brick, because the red brick holds iron ore, and that conducts the energy that was so significant to the Tartarian architecture. Like, they were all using water, the ether, free energy. Tartaria civilization were lit up to the fucking max. If you go to like pictures of sort of early 1900s, say in these cities in France, all over the world, like, they're lit up, man. And this is before we technically had light bulbs. It was all free energy. It was just and you will notice also their buildings always include water, whether there was a massive water reserve under the structure, like, or if there was a massive water fountains all around the structure, or you look at these sort of like Buckingham Palace type, you know, because they've all been stolen, right? These were Tartarian structures that have been like hijacked by our nefarious bullshit leaders and royal families, right? They've all around the world, they've been hijacked, all the most beautiful buildings, but they're always surrounded by lakes, waters, fountains, water, because the water conducted the ether into harmonics that, like, were just like, we all know the amazing experiment with Japanese Emoto, where he took the water crystals and he froze them and he put love on one and hate on one, and we saw the beautiful symmetry and the love crystal and all the fucked upness of the hate one. Similar, right? We now live an example of that hate crystal, where they've done nothing since tearing Tartaria down but poison us. They've poisoned this planet. We live in poison. We eat it, we drink it, we sleep in it, we wear it, we breathe it. We are being poisoned 24/7. The vax is nothing really. Like, we're being poisoned in every regard. The vax is another example. But pre the Great Reset, it wasn't about poison. It was the complete and utter opposite, which is why they could imagine and create the technology that would simply build these beautiful structures. Everything about the Tartarian culture was beautiful, elegant, sophisticated, geometrically perfect. Like, you go into these beautiful cathedrals and these temples and you look up and they're just stunning. Like, you couldn't, if we don't build like that. You look at Melbourne now and all the buildings are fucking wonky and obscured and messed up, like examples of fakery and the opposite. And Jeff, like let's even talk about right now, these ghost cities that are popping up all over the world, with huge, massive cities empty of people, mostly in China, massive infrastructure, fake Tartarian structures. They've mimicked, all these, I don't know if you've looked, but they've mimicked all these Tartarian structures. Like, you bring them back into these ghost cities, which currently have no people in, take the photos, and you've got a new reset. But this time, I guess the winners of the Great Reset are the ones that please Satan the most. And let's face it, China's human rights, their human trafficking, the adrenochrome, everything we know to be horrible and terrible about the world, it's in China. So
Certainly
it's pretty fascinating to watch. Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more like China here every day. Communist regime, they're restricting our rights and liberties and freedom of speech. We're under attack, and secret societies, Freemasonry, they're involved in a lot of these historical cover-ups as well. And they speak of Atlantis as well, and cities underwater that had advanced technology as well. This has also been covered up, hasn't it?
Ugh. I mean, only like there's pyramids here in Australia, and probably one of the most famous examples is the Gympie Pyramid. And actually, like, we've been on a quest for a crystal city. We're on a quest for the crystal city here in Australia. And we like this quest because it's lofty and it involves nonsense and it involves the imagination. And I tell you, man, like, to get through the times we're in right now and apply all of your spiritual understandings, we have to move into a chapter of fucking nonsense and make some stuff up, because that is where you will find truth. Like, you have to go back to that innocence of place. So we're on a quest for the crystal city here in Australia. We're going into the desert in December, literally on this quest. Like, it feels fucking cool. It's like Indiana Jones in reality. Like, why the fuck not? I'm sick of sitting out here. Yeah. We all need a hit of vitamin D, mega right now. So we're going to the desert. But anyway, on this, we've opened this concept up to the world. And oh my God, we've been inundated with people wanting to talk about the crystal cities here in Australia. Like, awesome context. And yesterday we had an amazing conversation and with JCK, and like Gympie, she tuned into it, and Gympie was one of the most significant crystal city clusters in Australia, because there's a few here. And it is only this week that the Gympie Pyramid, which has been under sovereign protection, like there's been a sovereign camp in front of it, protecting it from the Queensland Road Authority, completely got destroyed by the police. Everyone got arrested, and they came in there like brutes, protected the Queensland Road Authority, who are now in the process of like putting a highway right through this sacred original site. So I tell you, like, they can knock these pyramids down, but they can't reach the 5D version. Like, fuck it. Like, they can't. We're living in a multi-dimensional, right now, there's literally like, there could literally be 1,000 versions of me standing on top of me. I wouldn't know. Like everything's now. There's no past. There's no future. It's all now, which means Tartaria in some aspects is still working now. And we're living in the fake shut down version of it. Very much like a movie called Dark City. Have you seen Dark City?
No, I haven't, but I'll definitely look into it. But see, a lot of history, a lot of the students, when they're in the education system, they find it boring. But if they actually knew the true story that was happening, they'd find it fascinating, and people would be intrigued, and they would take it their own initiatives to try and learn as much as they could. It seems like they suppress the information. They don't want us to realize our true potential. That's a factor, I believe.
Absolutely.
And just really covering up what took place. Now, some of the buildings, you said the mathematical precision, the geometry, it's at one of the highest levels that we just don't see with these modern structures, do we?
Not at all. Not at all. Like the true reality of Australia, because they went from like, we've arrived 10 years into being here, boom, 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 all these extraordinary buildings. And then they say, and then the gold rush hit Australia. The gold rush came to Melbourne, as if that's to like make sense to us. So we're taught that then like isn't this interesting? We got swamped with Chinese immigrants. Once again, we got anyway, we got swamped with Chinese immigrants who all apparently had their own tour ships. What? And it's like came to Australia. How? Why? Like, how did that even happen? And then all the able-bodied men, which probably was like 5 at the time, all rushed out to the wilderness in Ballarat and Bendigo, which, by the way, are also Tartarian structures. Ballarat, oh my God, and Bendigo, they've been there forever. They're so old, those structures, right? But apparently they rushed out into the bush, into the wilderness with their little gold pans and their pick and their little fucking, tablecloth as a tent and outfit and whatever. No food, no provisions, nothing. They just like went out into the wild and then they just found gold. So much gold, we're told, that it all came back to Melbourne, like sent back to England, because like there's no way to convert it here. There's no machines, there's no nothing. And like it all gets converted into millions and billions of dollars that then boof, Melbourne's built. Like that makes no fucking sense. Like when you strip it back like that, like the way, the elaborate nature they have. I mean, literally they must have had people full time for decades, like telling these stories, these lies, and making them, like putting them in all the history books. And then like, what else is really fascinating is around the time of the Great Reset, and then we've got all the photos of the empty cities worldwide, and then which is someone took them, and then we've got like suddenly the people being reintroduced, and then all around the world started popping up these insanely elaborate World Trade Fairs. Like I'm talking, they were like old realm, and in the history books we're told these buildings were built out of plaster in a year, just as a decorative element to these trade fairs. But every time they were full of the most extraordinary structures, statues, rivers, building. And then after every trade fair, there'd be a disaster, and fire would take it all out, or an earthquake would take it all out, or, and it would all get destroyed, that whole Tartarian empire. So the World Trade Fairs were almost like a satanic, like sacrifice to the old world. But in those trade fairs, they introduced all the things that they were planning to roll out across the world, including our Indigenous. They introduced all the Indigenous tribes from all the world. Here's your Indigenous, like basically they're your slaves. Here's Arnott's biscuits. Here's Coca-Cola. Here's Wiggly's gum. Here's a power tool. Here's the fashion we're all going to be wearing. And they're all wearing the same fashion in all these photos. Everyone has the same fucking clothes on. It's freaky. It's like a fucking clone show, right? But this is the freaky fact of the World Trade Fairs. They had baby incubators. So what we have come to realize is basically when the Great Reset happened, whatever happened to the organic consciousness, us or the people who were going to reseed the human race, whether we got taken underground and our minds reset, whether we've just always been clone babies, whether we were mass produced for this moment, we don't know yet. That one we haven't worked out. But like basically there were no children. There were no babies and no children. They didn't exist. And then at these World Trade Fairs, they had these baby incubators, which was an exhibition all around the world. And you can go in and you'd watch these babies growing in these incubators, like clone babies. Hello. And that basically they'd advertise that, one day in one of these incubator chambers was worth 1 year of growth. And then people could just buy a baby. And they'd all flock there as if they'd never seen a baby before. Like they didn't know what a baby was. And then suddenly we get these orphan trains. All the way through the world, orphanages, orphans started pouring out of the system, like fucking train loads of orphans sent out into the country, boatloads of orphans sent out around the world, orphans sent to every part of the world, including Australia. Just like, what the fuck? Like, as what, there were so few people back there, but we're being told to believe that like literally millions of parents gave up their children because they couldn't deal with them. Like orphan trains everywhere. So we go from baby incubators and suddenly all these kids are like rolled out of the factory line, out from underground or wherever the fuck they had us, and reintegrated into the world, and they ended up becoming the workforce essentially. But like, it's a really trippy, freaky friggin' aspect to all of this, like that orphans and babies were integrated en masse around the world, not organically, not naturally, just like en masse. And wow, like, and then you watch how they came into all these nations and genocided the original people, genocided them and stole their children and took them underground all around the world and did horrible experiments on them. So it's like never ended. We're just an extension of this, but this time around, I think we're waking up before the main event.
I think so too. That's a very plausible scenario, and people need to question their own history and the history of this earth and keep an open mind as well. You see a lot of tourists and even people that live here walking around the city, they're totally oblivious to some of the Tartarian structures, the architecture. They walk straight past and they don't bat an eyelid. Now, if someone wanted to get around the city of Melbourne and visit some of these structures, they can go to the library. Like you said, that's amazing, isn't it? That's breathtaking. And
yeah, I mean,
where else can they check out?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many amazing ones. Like, okay, so the exhibition center, obviously in Carlton Gardens, is just gorgeous. That in itself was like 13 times bigger. And they apparently built that just for the Queen's visit. And then there was a massive fire, same story, massive fire, everything gets burnt down. You can't actually burn these buildings down. Like, they have to be destroyed. Fire can't burn them down. And there was water all in front of the exhibition center. You've got like town hall, you've got the beautiful cathedrals all the way through the city. I mean, they're extraordinary. You've got like all the arcades. Melbourne used to have these amazing, unbelievable shopping arcades. Flinders Street Station, hello. You've got like, what else we got? Some of the, if you go up to Collins Street, there's some amazing, unbelievable buildings you've probably never even noticed. The ANZ Bank on Collins Street, known as the Gothic Bank, is fucking, I mean, it's one of my fuck off favorites. It's like, you could not even imagine this stuff. You have walked past it your whole time in Melbourne, never even looked up, because if you look up, you'll just be blown away. RMIT in the city it looks like Camelot. It literally looks like Harry Potter Camelot. Like, go and check that one out. That is right there opposite the National Library. It is just so beautiful when you're actually looking at it through the Tartarian lens. And look, every town hall, South Melbourne Town Hall, Collingwood Town Hall, all the town halls, all the national libraries, all of the war memorials, all of the beautiful old arcades, most of the cathedrals, like, it's like basically all of Fitzroy, all of Brunswick Street, all of Smith Street, all of Swanston Street, all of Burke Street. Look up and you're going to see Tartaria is the whole city. Like, it is the whole fucking city. Melbourne in completion was here in its entirety. We found this city dead and empty and buried in mud. The whole thing.
Excellent information. I'm going to make more of an effort myself to get out and do some sightseeing and really take that all in and look at things on a whole new level, like you said, and realize and look at it with new eyes. So that's brilliant. You've been wonderfully spoken, Kelly. It's a privilege to have you on the show. If people want to find more of your works, they can. Yeah.
Look, come and join the Facebook page. That's kind of like, I mean, I just started because I was walking around the city with my camera, with my iPhone going, look at this, and putting up these little videos. But yeah, we've got a really vibrant community now. It's Tartaria Australia Facebook. And everyone is so fucking pleasant to be around and so smart and so engaged in putting this all together. You'll literally lose hours in the content. Like, people are just, and everyone is so nice. Like, there's no infighting, there's no fuckery. The disclosure community, unfortunately, is full of like, because it's an space. But Tartaria is like, Lord,
No.
we're getting to the truth. It's all very high, and I swear a lot, and it's all very fun. And then we've got the YouTube, Tartary Australia YouTube, which is just under my name, Kelly Jones. And every week I do a show with Autodidactic looking at the Crystal City and Tartary Australia. So look, man, Australia is becoming significantly focused on around the world. Like, people know, like, we very well know that the original law keepers here, the original people are here, the heart of the world is here in Uluru. We know how significant Australia is, and like, our lie is the easiest to debunk because we ain't got no history after 200 years ago. So guys, jump on, come and join the treasure hunt. It'll recharge your disclosure batteries.
That's beautiful. I'm very impressed with all your research. Continued success with everything you're doing. Thanks once again for coming
Jeff.
on the show.
Pleasure. Bye. See you, mate.
Well, that does it for another episode of the We Are Change talk show. The censorship has been extreme lately, so be sure to subscribe to the backup channels BitChute, Rumble, archive.org, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the We Are Change talk show. Thank you.